The Tom Woods Show, episode 526.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Hey everybody, if you've been meaning to start that blog or website but you don't know what your first steps are, then check out the free ebook I created for you, taking you step by step through the process, including a free video tutorial showing you how to get a blog up and running in just 5 minutes. Plus, if you check out tomwoods.com/publicity before starting up that blog, I'll give you some free publicity right out of the gate. So check it all out, the free ebook, the video tutorial, and the publicity offer at tomwoods.com/publicity. Well, today's your lucky day if you're listening to this episode. It's tremendous fun to be able to talk to Dave Smith. You may not know that name, but I dare say after today's episode, you will remember it. Dave Smith is a stand-up comedian and host of the podcast Part of the Problem. He is a libertarian, which makes the whole thing even more interesting. How do you promote libertarianism while you're also doing stand-up? Not that he'd have to, by the way. He is allowed to have his own separate career. Not every aspect of life has to be permeated by libertarianism, but he does, in fact, incorporate these ideas into some of his material. So it's quite interesting to talk to him about that. He's also a regular guest and panelist on Kennedy on the Fox Business Network. You'll also see him on various other programs on Fox Business and the Fox News Channel. I am going to put all his contact information, including comicdavesmith.com, his Twitter, link to his podcast, all that stuff on the show notes page, tomwoods.com/526. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up, Tom? Thanks so much for having me.
Dave, you realize there's a lot of pressure when you're a comedian as a guest on somebody's podcast, right? I mean, I'm expecting you to carry the whole darn show.
Like, people are already like, this guy isn't that funny.
Yeah, he's not funny. Like, I've been listening for 10 seconds. I haven't heard any jokes. All right. I want to introduce you to people. I knew a little bit about you, and I'll be perfectly honest. I didn't tell you this before we went on, but I knew a little bit about you, and then I checked out some of the podcast, and I thought it's not really quite my style. but then I thought, there are a lot of things that aren't totally my style that I still can find room for, and I know are making a difference in their own way. So what the heck,
So not your style would be what, the like incessant cursing?
Yeah, that would pretty much. That would be pretty. See, that's what I do when I'm not recording.
Okay, fair enough.
When I am recording, no. But although it depends on how outraged I am about something. But by and large, it's how I used to be, but I'm not anymore. So as we get started, I want you to introduce yourself to people. I want people to know who you are. I'm gonna talk about how you came to hold your views and stuff. We'll do that separately.
Sure.
But who you are and how you make your living. Do you, in fact, make your living full time by being funny?
Yeah, I do. I basically at this point I split making my living between stand-up comedy, where I make a little bit in the city. I do like the club scene, and then I go out on the road and I'll make a little bit more money working the road. I also it's split basically between stand-up comedy and podcasting. I have a couple podcasts. I have one that's on the Anthony Cumia network. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was part of a big
Gavin
show.
McInnes is on his network.
Yes, Gavin McInnes also is on his network. Yeah, so we make some money off that, some money off the stand-up stuff. I do a little bit of radio stuff here and there, a little bit of TV stuff for Fox News. So kind of like yourself, I make some of my money on online content, and then just kind of hustling around. I have a few different sources of revenue coming in.
It's tricky, though, isn't it? I mean, you got to really be on your toes when you don't have a full-time, employer in a typical salary relationship.
Yeah, it is. But I guess as we were talking a little bit about before, that's what keeps you feeling alive.
Yeah, that's how I feel. And I mean, and once you get to a certain plateau where you feel like I'm comfortable and I don't have to worry that I'm going to be out in the street, then it does make me feel more alive and not so much like I'm going to have a nervous breakdown or whatever.
Yeah.
I feel comfortable with my life. I've reached a point where I feel really at home. So you do stand up. That has got to be, before we even get into libertarianism and stuff, that's got to be, on the one hand, extremely exhilarating. Because I like being on stage in front of people.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. And I love when I say something that I didn't even think was that funny and people think is really funny. And then I say something that I think is hysterical and it's crickets. But it's fun to try it. But on the other hand, there's got to be a part of it that's a little terrifying. Like we've all seen that comedian who bombs, and once you bomb, there ain't no coming back.
Well, yeah, but bombing is part of it. I mean, every stand-up comedian's bombed. You do this every single night, and you start when you're terrible. Like, you have nothing. You don't have any jokes. You're like, I guess I could maybe do an impression of a stand-up comedian. But it's very exhilarating. It's a lot of fun to crush. It really hurts to bomb, but it's a great thing to bomb. It helps your soul. It's good for you. It's like getting your
I
heart
want to hear.
broken.
Yeah, elaborate on that.
It's like getting your heart broken when you're young. It brings you back down to earth, and it makes you re-question everything. You know?
Okay, all right, fair enough. But now, once you get to a certain level of experience,
yes, then you don't need a bomb anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I've already grown.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now I need to just kill. But as you said, killing in any capacity, whether it's like giving a speech or being funny or whatever, it's great to get up there, risk that, put your ideas out in front of people, and get that reward. I remember one of your favorite moments ever that I love watching is that it's on YouTube. That speech you gave, I think it's in Las Vegas. The one where you go into the end about being anti-war, and it's a very kind of pro-war crowd.
Oh, Los Angeles, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
and then by the end, you've got them like cheering for you, and that's a great feeling. So I feel the same way when I do kind of like any comedy I do that's challenging liberals or their worldview. You go in very much as in the stand-up comedy world as being kind of like, ooh, what's he doing here?
But not all your comedy is political, is it?
No, but I do talk about that a lot. I mean, I'll make jokes about anything, but I'm just such a passionate libertarian that's kind of seeped into everything in life.
But yet, I've seen enough stand-up to know that it seems like if you just attack politicians in general, everybody feels like it's okay. Like only the real partisans will say, "Now, wait a minute, I like Joe Biden." You know?
Right. Well, that's for sure. Well, only real partisans like Joe Biden. Period. So
yeah, that's a good point too.
Just leave it with that. But I'll go more at just attacking the way liberals think about government, the way attacking that liberals really themselves are the privileged one. I like to talk about the contempt for free markets and capitalism that liberals have, and how funny it is that you could only feel that way if you're really privileged. Like if you walk through Times Square and you think to yourself like, man, the consumerism and the marketing, this is terrible. Just realize that no one from Central Africa would come here and look around and be like, oh my God, is this CEO making a profit?
I'm disgusted.
They would just be like, food, yes, food. And I don't even have to catch it or hunt it. This is incredible.
Yeah.
So, and I always, I would always really resent around 2008 when Obama first came in, and there would be this like politically correct line of thinking where they would go, too bad for comedians, George W. Bush is out, because there's nothing funny about Obama. Like he's just so competent and brilliant. What's funny about that?
Yeah, right.
And I was like, okay, yeah, George Bush is dumb, but that got old in like 2001. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, he doesn't speak well. That's now that joke's over.
Yeah, right.
And Obama was like a limitless pool of funny. Everything about him. His middle name is Hussein. I mean, how are you not? This is the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. He won a Nobel Peace Prize and has expanded the 2 longest wars in our history. I mean, I know that's kind of dark funny, but there's definitely irony there. I mean, there's just so much. He's a constitutional lawyer. It's hilarious.
Well, when you talk about the capitalism stuff, I don't know if you've seen the Louis C.K. Bit on the Tonight Show or one of these things where he's talking about how people don't appreciate the unbelievable world they live in. Like you're complaining up on an airplane, that there's something wrong with your drink or whatever. But look, you're sitting on a chair in the sky.
Yeah.
Stop and think about that. And it seems to me that one ingredient of at least some good stand-up comedy is when the comedian articulates a truth that everybody basically knows but has never heard stated before. Yep. Like, for instance, the incredible nature of everything that we experience every single day. And as a free market guy, you have a ton of material there.
No, it's so fascinating. And like, I think you've made this point before, but it seems to be only in the free market we take these things for granted. When government does something, it's like, we got to celebrate this forever. Like, we put a man on the moon. Oh, my God. Well, what did that really do for anybody except kind of beat the Russians and waste a lot of money? Who knows? But we're going to celebrate that for life. But when the market does these amazing things, like, oh, you feel like going to L.A.? Here, jump in a seat, fly through the sky. You'll be there in a couple hours. It's like, why is my beverage warm?
Yeah, exactly. This Coke is flat.
Yeah.
Or how often do you have to come up with new material?
I mean, it's not so much that you have to come up with new material. It's kind of the rate.
Well, how often do you feel you need to come up with new
I
material?
always love to. I love to talk about topical stuff and what's going on in the news this week. Like, I like to talk about the election. I like to talk about the last debate and kind of riff on that. But then and then I'll also kind of build material that's timeless out of it. So I talk about a lot of topical stuff, and then you just kind of get rid of that. So, just, I don't know, just examples off the top of my head. But like when, do you remember at Nelson Mandela's funeral when there was that fake sign language translator?
Yeah.
So I had for a couple months, I had this whole long bit on that guy. But now at this point, it's just kind of like, hey, who cares that there was a fake sign language translator 3 years ago?
But it must hurt to have to give that bit up.
It's not. I mean, the man was a sign language translator who made it to the top without learning sign language. Yeah, I mean, I had that for a little piece of time, and now it's gone. Sure, but that's what keeps you on your toes. And now I got to write something about how hilarious Bernie Sanders is and how the guy who just got pulled out of my Jewish grandpa's pinochle game probably isn't going to be the next president. There's always something there.
Yeah, there's always something. You must. Well, I was about to say you must have a website, but I'm not seeing one in the notes.
I do have a website. It's comicdavesmith.com. I literally just got it rebuilt, so it's not. I don't know. My brother-in-law is building it for me. It's not like on Google and stuff yet, but you can go check it out. Comic Dave Smith.
And is that where people in the New York area can find out where you're going to be?
Yeah, you can find out where I'm going to be, my upcoming TV stuff, and also, on Twitter at Comic Dave Smith. I tweet most of my stuff out.
Okay, all right, that's good. All right, so we're going to put your Twitter, we're going to put the website, put all that up at tomwoods.com/526. All right, I'd love to just keep asking you about comedy. Maybe we'll come back to that later because I'm just fascinated. I watch a good stand-up comedian, and they make it look so easy that they can just get up there, and it just seems like a stream of consciousness. But it's not. Now, no doubt there's some ad-libbing, but it's meticulously planned, the transitions between two radically different topics.
Sure.
Sometimes the transition is incredibly ham-handed and awkward, but they make you feel like you've just been sitting there through a seamless presentation. That's really hard.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, look, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, I feel the same way about like what you do. I mean, it's particularly like when I first found, libertarianism and the whole idea, and I'll look at someone like you, give a speech, and you're like, man, this guy just gets it. But of course, at one point, you just had questions and you were reading and learning. It's like any other job. You just kind of become a professional at it.
Yeah, I guess I knew that was the answer, but yet I guess I'm impressed that every professional out there who does something that seems amazing to me. I know we all started at zero,
yeah,
but all the same, not everybody. It's not just a matter of learning the craft. Not everybody is cut out to do what you're doing, and it impresses those of us who are not cut out for it. I have people saying to me sometimes because they like the jokes in my speeches that I should do stand up, and they don't understand these are two entirely different genres.
I'll tell you, there's a video of Peter Schiff doing stand up.
I heard
at the Comic Strip, which is a club that I've played for years here in New York City.
Wow, that is good.
Peter's a funny guy. I think you're very funny too. I love I often use. I mean, I give you credit, but I use a lot of your analogies. Like, I love the Walmart school thing. That's brilliant.
Oh yeah, that's one of the best analogies I've ever come up with.
That's incredible. I'll tell you another one that I think is amazing that you don't use enough. But I forget where I heard you say this, but this is one of your best analogies ever. Is the idea of the drone campaign if we just policed America that way? Like, if we were just like, okay, so in Chicago, some suspected criminals broke into a school, so we're going to drone bomb the school.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
No, but isn't that not an option? Like, no.
Yeah, like wouldn't that be like that? Wouldn't even be like 1,000th on the list of things you would consider.
Yeah, well, that
you would think of, you'd bring in a hostage guy. Like, you'd think of something. Yeah. You wouldn't do that.
Wait a minute. Have we exhausted every single other possible option?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, because now I remember that, because as you were describing it, I thought, I'm going to have to embarrass poor Dave and say the reason I don't use that one enough is that I have no idea what you're talking about. I never said that, but I did actually say that.
Yours.
Okay, I do remember that. All right, let's see what we can talk. There's so many things here. Tell me about your podcast, first of all. What do you talk about on it?
Well, it's called Part of the Problem, and I think I talk about a lot. It's a libertarian, take on philosophy and pop culture and politics, and I try to talk about it from a very, a non-academic, just kind of common sense point of view. And I try to be funny with it, and as you mentioned, I curse a lot, and I'm probably very inappropriate, but I do try to refer people to more serious academics such as yourself and, everybody at Mises and stuff like that. So my thing is that I'm in a very, like, a lot of my listeners are just people who listen to comedy podcasts in general, who know me from other stuff, like the stuff over at the Anthony Cumia Network, other shows that I do. And I try to just kind of provoke their own thinking, with what kind of our worldviews are on, at least on politics and stuff like that. And get them interested in that and just have a conversation. So that's kind of what we do. I'm very interactive with the fans. There's a segment where I take listener comments and respond to anybody's problems with the idea of anarcho-capitalism. And I'll do things like, so on my last episode, what I did was we just played, because I was getting a lot of people kind of asking like why I'm being so hard on Rand or why I'm so disappointed by his campaign. So we just played audio clips of his answers at debates and then played clips of Ron Paul answers at debates.
Oh, very interesting.
And I think by the end of it, there's no question why someone would be more passionately supporting Ron.
Yeah. Well, I've talked about this on the show. Boy, we got some pushback in the third of the debates when Lou and I did the analysis, and I went back and listened, and everything we said is 1,000% defensible. So I don't know what the sensitivity here is.
I loved it, and those are some of my favorite episodes. And by the way, I listen to the show religiously, and those are like, I think some of my favorite episodes are anytime Lou Rockwell is on. By the way, Lou Rockwell is such a hero in this movement and does not get anywhere near the credit he does.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, he's a boss just in the way he handles himself.
Just everything about the guy. He's like, look, if I had to list heroes in this movement, it's like Mises and Rothbard and Ron Paul just are at the top. And then it's Lou Rockwell. That's it.
Yeah,
the guy created the
absolutely.
Mises Institute. He's the reason why we're all able to do what we do. And and they've made him such a shady, controversial.
Oh yeah. He is the most unjustly maligned person I know of, and believe me, I know a lot of unjustly maligned. I am an unjustly maligned person.
My family's Jewish, and my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, so that very much plays a role in my family's history. And I remember when I first came out of the closet to my mother, that I was a libertarian probably for a full year before I told her hey, I'm a libertarian. I've been completely convinced. And the first thing she said to me was, she goes, be careful. I think a lot of those guys are anti-Semites.
Oh, wow.
And it's just this is just seeped into the culture. And I had to explain to her, I was like, Mom, the two people who they hold in the highest esteem are Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard.
And you know what's funny, Dave, actually, is that if you actually read the real live anti-Semites, they hate libertarianism because they say it's a Jewish ideology.
Oh, that's right.
That's their complaint. And in fact, they call Lou Jew Rockwell.
It's so funny, right? Well, it's like when they would call Rothbard they would call him a commie. Like the National Review guys and people like that.
Yeah.
He's the most anti-communist person ever.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Yeah, it's totally crazy. You've been on Kennedy quite a bit on the Fox Business Network, but you've never been opposite Michael Malice?
No, I have not. And I'll tell you.
We gotta, if she's not going to make that happen, I'll have to make that happen right here on the show.
I'm going to be on, I'll be hanging out and I think doing some warm-up for your debate with Michael Malice in New York City.
Yeah, that's going to be fun. That's December 3rd of this year. Details on my events page, tomwoods.com/events. If you're in the New York City area, we're going to be debating Alexander Hamilton. And then Dave will be there, too. I mean, come on. Why are you not coming?
If you're a libertarian and you're in New York, you got to be there. Now, there was I think I shared something on the Facebook page because I'm a proud member of the Tom Woods Show Elite. And
I love that. You're the first guest I've ever had who's a supporting listener of the show.
Wow.
Awesome.
I did not know. That's a nice feather in my cap. All right. I think I posted something about the first time I met Judge Napolitano on the show, and you said you should request to be opposite Michael Malice. So I said something to one of the producers at Kennedy. I go, I'd love to be on with Michael. And she looked shocked at me and she said, you are the first person who's ever requested to be on with Michael Malice.
I'm going to tell him that as soon as we finished it. He was going to love that.
But no, I am very fascinated by his argument. I didn't, it's such an intriguing argument to me that he's making about Hamilton. So I'm very interested.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's he's totally sincere about it, too. He's not trolling. He absolutely believes it. But what I love about him is he's even smarter than he seems. And he knows it. There isn't a problem with excessive humility with Michael Malice, but he always makes me think, and he challenges me, but we really, really enjoy each other's company very much. And that the fact that in 2006 he had a graphic novel written about his life. I mean, by Harvey Picard, and I was totally absorbed by it. It's incredible. Dave, let's take just a minute for this message. Have you ever found yourself in this position? You're in a situation in which the free society is being attacked by opponents. You're surrounded by friends or acquaintances or family members, all of whom disagree with you, and all of whom are saying things you know to be nonsense. But you're outnumbered and outgunned, and you're not sure you could answer every objection they might raise. And you're frustrated because you know your position is right, but you haven't mastered all the material necessary to win all the debates you might find yourself drawn into. Well, that's what LibertyClassroom.com is for. At LibertyClassroom.com, we have 14 courses with more to come every year that you can listen to in your car, and they're taught by me and by other faculty you can trust. It's the history and economics we didn't get in school. Plus, in our Q&A forums, get all the questions you want answered by our expert faculty. Check it out at LibertyClassroom.com and use coupon code SHOW in all caps for a special listener discount. All right, other things we can talk about. I want to know, how did you get to be who you are? I'm always, and I know that the listeners are also interested in people's individual stories. What was the light bulb for you? Was there one?
Yeah, I mean, the spark was, it's almost hacky to say at this point, but the spark was the Ron Paul Giuliani moment. I was never very into politics. I was a typical liberal New Yorker who just kind of thought, there's like this underlying thing in liberal culture that's just kind of like, you're so obviously right, you don't really need to check up on this. Like, you don't really need to read a tremendous amount. Conservatives are just idiots. So I was kind of just operating in that world. And a lot of the things seem plausible, like, oh yeah, the rich people should pay a little bit more so poor people have health care. Sure. Why wouldn't we be on board with that? But I became very anti-war in the George W. Bush years for obvious reasons. And then when I saw that Ron Paul Giuliani moment, I was like, oh my God, this guy is breaking down the anti-war position better than anyone I've ever heard. And he just made the most brilliant point that it seemed like nobody else had ever made, which is really, I think for some of your younger listeners, they might even forget that this was actually something politicians sold after 9/11, was the idea that they hate us for our freedom. This was a real thing that was pushed by our leaders. And Ron Paul just said, well, how would we feel if someone else was occupying us? And it was just such a light bulb moment for me. And then the fact that he was arguing for the free market too was just very intriguing. I had never really heard that position before. So I just felt that like I needed to learn more about it. And then through a couple clicks online, I found you and Peter Schiff. And then through you, I found Rothbard. And as Kane said on your program once from the WWE, you find Rothbard and then it's just kind of over from there.
Wow, that is an incredible story.
And I'll tell you the first two pieces that from you that you recommended to me, and not personally to me, but to everyone, were that I read of Rothbard. It was like I just heard the name Rothbard so much, I was like, I got to check this guy out. And I read Anatomy of the State and War, Peace, and the State.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a great essay.
They're just the two greatest essays to this day. I think they're the two greatest pieces of writing I've ever read in my life. I mean, it's completely lucid, completely logical, and just he takes you step by step to the obvious conclusion. And then that's been it. I've been converted since then.
I'm going to definitely link to those for anybody who hasn't read them. We'll have those on today's show notes page also. If
you listen to the Tom Woods Show and you haven't read Anatomy of the State and War, Peace, and the State, that's insane.
Yeah, it's totally insane. We can't allow that to go on.
Yes.
We can't allow that to go on. Tell me about a time when you were engaged in, you were doing a stand-up routine and it got political and you were saying something that obviously had a libertarian tinge to it and it just didn't work.
Oh, that's a good one.
Oh, wow. Hey, actually, if that's a hard one to answer, that means you're really doing well.
Well, I think I'm able to, with stand-up, I mean, I'm able to approach it from a kind of, I'm just being funny and being logical with it. So it's almost like I kind of like try to open you up into it. So I did this bit about Now, this isn't necessarily an example of it not working in bombing, but I did this bit about, it was when there were a lot of protests against the cops going on in New York City over the Eric Gardner thing. And I actually had a friend of mine who said this to me. He's a very smart guy. He's pretty lefty. And he said, he was like, the messed up thing about the cops is that the cops work for us. And I just had a lot of fun on stage dissecting that idea. Like, the cops work for us. I was like, really? Do they work for us? How about we test this out? Why don't you go round up a few cops and just start bossing them around a little bit, and we'll see who works for who. And then I take it to this level where I just make the point about taxes, where, he said to me, he goes, well, I pay my tax dollars and that pays their salary, so they work for us. And I was like, yeah, but you don't choose to pay your taxes. You have to. So that's like if someone mugged you and then you were like, all right, that guy works for me now. And I wasn't even planning on hiring a new employee. This has been a pretty good day. So I do a bit about that. And this one guy, this older guy who is clearly a very liberal or leftist kind of guy, he stood up and started heckling me over the difference between a government and private robbery.
Of course.
And it was such a fascinating moment. Now that he was kind of being a jerk, so the crowd got behind me. So maybe this isn't a great example of what you were asking, but this just came to mind where I remember he goes, it's different when it's a government. If it's a government, they do work for you. They represent the people. And then I remember I just said to him, I said, okay, so what if that guy mugged you and then he had your money, and as he was running away, he goes, I'm a government. I go, then is it okay? Then is it legitimate? So anyway, I don't know. That's the first story I think off the top of my head.
That's a good one. That's a good. Well, what about a case where you were going in and you thought, again, with a libertarian kind of message, you thought this one might be pretty edgy, and then it actually wound up doing even better than you thought. Was there a case of that?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of those. I mean, I thought some of the stuff like going hard against Bernie Sanders, I was a little bit concerned about that when he, because he's so, I mean,
he's popular.
Oh my God, it is terrifying. I mean, I do shows down in like the Village and very, the super liberal areas in New York, and he's like a cult figure to them. He is, tragically, they feel like the way we felt about Ron Paul. And I don't know why. And it's so interesting that, they call him like, but the big difference to me between Bernie Sanders and Ron Paul is that people like myself and younger people, the college kids who got behind Ron Paul, the thing they wanted to do was read. They wanted to learn. When kids are chanting "End the Fed," they've read something about monetary policy. You don't just get to having a passionate view on monetary policy without picking up a book. Bernie Sanders doesn't encourage these kids to read at all. He just encourages them that what they know is already right. Which is, what a propagandist does. But anyway, I think I'm digressing from your message. I think there's been a lot of things that I've thought, going after capitalism, going after what I really try to make fun of college kids who, like the lefty college kids who talk about privilege, that you're in 2015 in a first world country on a college campus. You're about as privileged as any human being has ever been in the history of the world. They're obsessed with who else has more privilege than them. I like going at that. And I think a lot of it has been more successful than I would have thought.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that. Has any of your experience in stand-up, has any of that influenced the way you think about how libertarians might package what they're saying effectively? Yeah,
well, absolutely. I think that's been because you kind of get to test it in front of an audience every night. I think the biggest, this Ron Paul campaign versus the Ron Paul campaign to me is demonstrated to all of us what the move is. And that is to be completely unapologetic. You have to come at it from a position where you clearly believe that this is right. And what Lou Rockwell always says, it's like, we have the truth on our side. That's this big weapon that Rand, for some reason, refuses to use. But we have the truth on our side. Do you remember, I don't know, did you ever see when Rand Paul, when he got into the thing with Rachel Maddow over the civil rights?
I knew that it happened, but I just couldn't bring myself to watch the clip.
And then, so he, she just argues with him for a while over it. And then he eventually comes out like 2 days later in the press and just goes, I would support the civil rights. Act of 1970. Like, he just bailed on it. And there's nothing looks worse than that. Nothing looks worse than if you take a position that could be seen as possibly racist, and then you walk it back like, oh yeah, you got me. I'm sorry. You have to.
Because basically everybody knows that's not correct.
Exactly.
Because why would he have said the first things in the first place? And what's so interesting is that, Ron took a principled position on that, even though he knows it is the most sacred piece of legislation of the past 100 years. And he knows that he would get a lot less grief from the left if he would, and from the right, for that matter, if he would just shut up about it. And he just quietly refuses to. And there is obviously, given the fact that, he had millions of supporters, there is something to that. That does draw people in.
Absolutely. There's something to it. I mean, look, Ron Paul proved it in a kind of sad way. Donald Trump is proving this again. But the PC culture or the sacred cows, these are all artificial creations. They're not real. You could go ahead and just say, you can say any of this stuff. Donald Trump called Mexicans rapists, and he's still doing great in the polls. Ron Paul exploded libertarianism onto the scene by being unapologetic. When Rand Paul got that question about Medicare, you can just say we shouldn't have Medicare. You can say that. You can. They've just convinced you can't go after these, third rails. I don't buy it. I think if you're completely unapologetic and you have the truth on your side, you can convince people. And in fact, I think that's the only way you're going to convince people.
Well, especially when the alternative is to sound exactly like the others.
Yeah.
Like they're all saying we have to have some reforms to the entitlements and this and that. If they all sound the same, then I'm going to go with the front runner.
Well, that's true. And that's Rand's biggest problem, particularly in that last debate where it seemed like he's almost given up. Like he's just saying what every other Republican for my entire life has said, like, we need a balanced budget and something like that. I feel bad inside. I feel bad almost just being on your program saying negative things about Rand Paul.
I hardly ever talk about him, and people, the people who are big partisans of his get upset at me. I hardly ever even bring the guy up.
And look, just out of the fact that Ron Paul is my hero, I don't want to be saying anything negative about his kid. I mean, just on that level. But the thing is, Ron Paul, all we needed in the movement, as far as I say, you're talking about what we can do in the future. The only thing we really needed was Ron Paul to be younger. That was just what was unfortunate, is that his age did not line up very well with when his movement exploded. Like if in 88 his movement had exploded, that would have been much, much better for us. If we could have another Ron Paul campaign, that would have been amazing. And then with Rand, we thought we had that. We were like, oh, we have another Ron Paul to go. And look, I do think it's fair, just to play devil's advocate to being difficult to or being hard on Rand. There's two thought experiments that we should, I think, play, which is, number one, how would we feel about Rand if his last name wasn't Paul? Like if he was just Rand Johnson.
Yeah, it would be, people would be saying, look, he's got a few ideas that we like that make him stand out a little bit from the Republican pack, but otherwise, he kind of sounds like one of these people. I mean, that is what you would say. That absolutely is.
I still think maybe we would give him a little bit more credit for his voting record. He does have a pretty good voting record.
Oh, yeah. We'd say he may be the best senator there is, right. And we would say all these things, but we would say, but I'm not going to take 9 months off my job to go campaign for the guy.
Now, I agree with that. Now, the other thing that I do think, the other thought experiment that's worth playing is, what if he had been right? Rand Paul was in first place in the polls a year ago, and this was already after endorsing Mitt Romney, voting for sanctions in Iran, a lot of the things that we don't like that he did. What if Rand Paul was still in first place right now? Maybe, and I don't know, I'm just playing kind of devil's advocate with myself, but maybe if that had worked out, then I would say, hey, well, he is in first. It does look like this is going to work out, and I sure would love to get a Paul in the White House.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting thought experiment. I mean, I would still feel like it was a missed opportunity, because I've never seen an example of somebody who stealthily holds a view, then gets elected, and then imposes it on everybody. I've never ever seen that happen.
That's a good,
because then there would have been a reason why, well, we can't do it because we got to get reelected, and now we can't do it for this.
And the other thing is that, and I don't mean to come off too conspiratorial with this, but the thing that I've come to realize that I did not realize in 2012, when I genuinely had my heart broken, I thought we were going to win it. I really got into the Ron Paul 2012 campaign. But in hindsight, Ron Paul was never going to win that campaign, and Rand Paul would never win this one. They just simply won't let that happen. They have too much in their arsenal that they'll never let that happen. But what this is an opportunity to get in front of 25 million people and do what Ron Paul did for me, for countless other people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Here's the big question. here's the big question for me about Rand, and then I want to talk about something else. Here's the big question. How many people years from now will say, watching Rand Paul in the debates changed my life? Do you think it'll be a non-zero positive number? I mean, I don't.
I don't know if it'll be zero, but it's not going to get.
But I mean, it's negligible.
Now, I do hang on to a little bit of hope that maybe even if he just says one thing interesting, I mean, his dad is always one click away from him online.
Well, that's true.
And that's one click away from him online. So maybe there can be some effect on that, but there's no question he missed a humongous opportunity to convert thousands and thousands more like his dad did.
All right, I want to ask you about, you were talking about political correctness for a moment. You must have heard what Jerry Seinfeld had to say about that, about college audiences, and they're so PC, and, you know, it's, I don't know what effect this has on comedians, but what did you think about that?
Oh, I mean, Jerry Seinfeld has been voicing something that comedians have been talking about forever. This has been something that's been going on for a long, long time, but it's worse than it's ever been. And just to give that a little bit of context, Jerry Seinfeld is not like a dirty, edgy comic. You know, Jerry Seinfeld is telling jokes about peanuts on airplanes. Yeah. And he's coming out saying, I can't tell my peanuts on airplanes jokes anymore because these college kids are out of their mind. They only see things through the lens of, you know, white male privilege versus everything else. So it's a very interesting look. I think you can go back on YouTube. There's an old clip of Dennis Miller and Bill Maher talking about how politically correct college kids had gotten. And this is like in the 90s. It's gotten so much worse. And this is to me, like where the Ron Paul college kids were like the best hope for the future. The most terrifying part of the future is that what is just prevalent on college campuses now is, you know, trigger warnings, safe spaces, the idea of offending someone with your words being the worst thing you can do. So it's definitely dominant. It's gotten, I haven't gotten in enormous amounts of trouble over it, but I know a few friends of mine who have gotten like written up in Salon.com and Jezebel.com, and they'll try to end comics' careers for saying something insensitive or, you know, making a joke about Cosby now is you're contributing to rape culture or some other nonsense.
Wow, that is something else. Well, I'm glad that, you know, comedians, at least some, you know, I like to see subgroup in America realize what's going on and how hard it is to, you know, speak your mind about important issues because you're afraid of who's going to try to destroy you.
Yeah.
And for that matter, I've always been curious about, you mentioned a heckler. I've always been curious about how comedians deal with hecklers. Of course, you can handle them on a case-by-case basis, but do you have you don't have to reveal to us what it is, but do you have some kind of a canned response ready for in case you do get heckled? Just a general kind of response or an attitude?
It's not so much of a canned response. It's just like a way to you know, like, I think like that used to be the thing, like in the 80s and stuff like that. It's always like, I don't come down to your job and blah, 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 you know. It's not so much a canned response. It is just you kind of know how to deal with them. One of the big things with a heckler is you have to learn how to let them hang themselves. It's most people who are heckling at a comedy club have had a couple drinks in them. They're being kind of obnoxious. And if you let them talk, they'll give you something very easy to shut them down with. So it'll be, you know, there's also, it's very important to know whether you have the room on your side or not. You know, like if I've already done a couple jokes and they've gotten big laughs and then someone heckles, you know, everyone's kind of with you. Like you're the funny guy. If you tell a couple jokes and they don't go over and someone heckles, that's a different situation. But usually someone heckles, you know, kind of like whatever. They'll say something and then you can always go like, oh, what'd you say, buddy? Expand on that. And they'll pretty much just hand it to you.
That's interesting. Do comedians ever sit around and like everybody in every other profession and talk about stuff like this? Oh, I got heckled and here's how I handled it.
Oh yeah, war stories and you know, we always comics love to sit around and just talk about what we call hell gigs, where you know just some nightmare show, particularly early in your career when you'll literally take any gig that pays. So you know I'll be like, okay, I'm going to Massachusetts to some bowling alley to go tell jokes for $300 or whatever. And, you know, the lights go out on you or the mic doesn't work. And, you know, we've all got stories like that. Bad hecklers, all that stuff. Always fun to trade those stories.
Well, this has been great. I mean, we could just go on forever, but I want to get people to visit your site, comicdavesmith.com. Do you have links to the podcast there yet?
Yeah, there's links to the podcast, some videos from TV stuff, and all that jazz.
Okay, so we'll have that. We'll have your Twitter. We'll have the Rothbard essays that you talked about. Lots of fun stuff to watch. If there's a particularly good clip from Kennedy or from TV that you're happy with, send it to me and I'll put it up there.
Okay,
but
great.
The show notes page for today will be tomwoods.com/526, and it'll have everything that I just mentioned. Well, anyway, a lot of fun, Dave. Great
Tom,
talking to you. I think you lived up to the billing.
Oh, well, thank you. That means a lot. And truly, man, it's an honor to be on the show. As I said, I listen to the show religiously. I love reading your stuff. Real Descent was incredible. I read it twice. And thanks for doing all the work you do.
Well, now guess what is also going to be on the show notes page.
There you go.
Dave, thanks so much for your time. It was great.
Thanks, Tom.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I think it was obvious how much I enjoyed that conversation. Remember tomwoods.com/526 if you'd like to find out more about Dave Smith and keep up with him or follow him on Twitter, anything like that. It's all at tomwoods.com/526. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about Austrian economics, but we're going to be talking about this complaint that you hear a lot from critics that we're unscientific because we're not running experiments in order to derive our conclusions. So how do we parry that effectively? We'll talk about that tomorrow. Then Friday, I'm all by myself. I've got several fun topics, including some stuff from Thomas Sowell's latest book. All kinds of fun stuff to talk to you about on Friday. Then next week, it is just a nut house next week on the show because I've just got such a ridiculously good lineup. Starting with, not immediately starting, that's true. Monday's going to be something different. But maybe Tuesday, Adam Kokesh will be on the show. And I've never met anybody who's lukewarm about Adam Kokesh. You either have one opinion or the other about Adam. But I haven't spoken to Adam in quite some time, and I would like to find out what he's up to and have an exchange of ideas. So that's going to be a lot of fun next week. So make sure you subscribe. You don't miss any of these episodes. See you tomorrow.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.